The distress signal from Station Eos-9 reached every corner of the Galactic Council network, echoing like a cry in an endless void. It was short, broken by static, and filled with panic, a voice calling for help from deep inside a radiation storm. The coordinates placed it in one of the most unstable regions of space, a place even drones avoided. Every rescue attempt that had ever entered that storm ended the same way: silence. The outpost had been built to study cosmic radiation fields, but the same storm it sought to understand had turned against it. The Council declared it impossible to reach. Reports were filed, condolences sent, and the galaxy moved on. To most, Eos-9 was already gone. But far away, on a small human base orbiting Titan's moon, a group of explorers sat around a dimly lit table, listening to the static-filled recording. They heard the fear in the scientist's voice, the cracking breath as he said, "If anyone can hear this, please." For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy, and even the hum of the machines seemed to fade. Other species had already decided it wasn't worth the risk, but humans had a habit of answering calls others ignored. They had done it on dying worlds, in collapsing stations, and even in storms that tore ships apart. This was nothing new to them. The mission was declared suicidal by the Council's analysis teams. The radiation field would tear through shields. The gravitational shifts would crush navigation systems. But still, when the broadcast came again, weaker this time, the human commander simply said, "We'll go." There was no cheering, no dramatic music, no grand announcement. Just quiet nods, tired faces, and that small spark of stubbornness that humans carried like a second heartbeat. News spread quickly. On alien networks, reporters asked, why would they go? Some mocked them, saying humans always rushed into danger without thinking. Others called them brave, even foolishly brave. But those who knew humans understood they couldn't stand the sound of someone being left behind. It wasn't about orders or politics. It was about the voice on that recording, the human need to do something when no one else would. As the crew prepared, the hangar buzzed with quiet tension. They checked and rechecked their systems, patched old equipment, and painted the words, "We hear you," on the side of their shuttle. The galaxy watched as the launch timer began to count down. 5, 4, 3. Each second felt heavier than the last. When the engines roared to life and the ship rose into the dark, no one was sure they'd ever see them again. In the silence that followed their departure, the Council's control center dimmed its lights and marked the mission as high risk, low chance of return. But somewhere inside that storm, beyond the static and the danger, a faint hope flickered. Because this time, humanity had answered. And when humans answered, they didn't stop until someone was brought home. The room was dim, the air thick with the quiet hum of machinery and the soft flicker of blue holographic light. Captain Mara Raines sat at the center of the table, her eyes fixed on the rotating image of Station Eos-9. Around her were 6 others, engineers, pilots, and medics, all wearing the same expression, a mix of fear, focus, and silent determination. The hologram kept glitching, cutting between fragments of data, radiation fields, wreckage drift, and distorted signal paths. It looked less like a map and more like a death sentence wrapped in light. The mission file was short. Reach the stranded scientists. Retrieve the data logs. Survive if possible. It sounded almost routine, but every simulation ended the same way. Total system failure before entry. The Council briefing officer, a calm-voiced alien with polished metal skin, had said the words without emotion. You have less than a 5% chance of survival. He had expected hesitation, maybe refusal. Instead, Mara had only leaned back in her chair, eyes calm, and replied, "We'll bring them home." The officer's gaze had flickered, a pause, not of disbelief, but quiet respect. Now, hours later, those words echoed in the room as her crew reviewed the plan again. They knew what they were walking into. The radiation storm wasn't just dangerous, it shredded communication systems and twisted gravity fields. Ships that entered it were pulled apart like paper. The navigation AI had refused to simulate the route, calling it non-navigable. But humans had always trusted something beyond numbers: instinct, courage, and a little bit of madness. As Mara stood and pointed toward the holographic projection, she traced a route with her finger through the storm's heart. "Here's where we'll drop manual control," she said, her voice steady. "After that, we fly blind until we see Eos-9. Once we find them, we move fast. We're not leaving anyone behind." Her crew didn't argue. They knew what it meant to follow her, to accept that some missions weren't about living or dying, but about what kind of people they refused to stop being. One of the younger engineers glanced at the storm data and whispered, "If we make it back, no one's ever going to believe this." Mara gave a faint smile, the kind that carried both warmth and warning. "Then we'd better make sure we do." Outside the briefing room, the vast hangar echoed with the sounds of preparation, engines being fueled, tools clattering, the hiss of coolant lines. The crew would soon be inside the smallest rescue craft ever sent into a storm of that magnitude. Every step closer to launch felt heavier, but none of them slowed down. They weren't going because they were fearless. They were going because someone out there still needed them. As the hologram dimmed and the last line of coordinates faded from view, Mara stood by the viewport, watching the swirling storm far beyond Titan's orbit. It looked calm from a distance, almost beautiful. But she knew better. She also knew this. No matter how dark that storm was, there was no greater honor than being the ones who dared to fly into it. The Aegis-3 shuttle rumbled on the launch pad, wrapped in mist and ice as Titan's thin atmosphere shivered with static. Inside the cockpit, the crew sat strapped into their seats, helmets sealed, hearts pounding in sync with the ship's rising hum. Outside, the storm thickened, lightning crackling across the dome shield of the moon base. The countdown began, a steady, echoing voice that seemed to blend with the thunder beyond the glass. 3, 2, 1. And then, with a deafening roar, the engines ignited. The Aegis-3 shook violently, the ground trembling beneath it as a pillar of blue fire lifted it into the dark sky. Across the system, thousands watched through live feeds, officers, soldiers, civilians, and aliens from dozens of species. Many didn't believe they'd make it. Some whispered that humans were reckless, their courage often mistaken for foolishness. Others watched with quiet awe, wondering what kind of heart kept a species trying even when logic said it was hopeless. For most, the rescue of Eos-9 was already a closed story. For humans, it was still unfinished. Inside the shuttle, the vibration was brutal. Panels flickered, alarms blinked red, and the cold hiss of oxygen filled the cabin. The pilot gritted her teeth, keeping her focus as shards of ice streaked past the hull. "Altitude stable," she said, her voice steady despite the shaking. The co-pilot nodded, fingers flying over manual controls. Course locked. Entering upper atmosphere in 10 seconds. The storm outside grew darker, flashes of white lightning bursting through the clouds like claws. From the rear viewport, Titan's surface became a swirl of fog and orange haze, shrinking beneath them until it was only a fading shadow. As they broke free of the moon's pull, the blackness of space opened before them, wide, silent, infinite. But it wasn't peace that greeted them. It was chaos. Ahead, the radiation storm swirled like a living thing, a vortex of green and red light twisting through the void. It pulsed, as if warning them to turn back. One of the crew whispered under her breath, "No one's ever come out of that." Mara, standing behind the pilot, placed a hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "Then we'll be the first. Back on Titan." Alien broadcasters commented in disbelief. "They're actually going through with it," one said. "Humans. They never know when to stop." But somewhere, in that same crowd, an older alien scientist muttered, "No, they just refuse to give up on anyone." As Aegis-3 neared the storm, static began to crawl across the windows like fireflies. The instruments started failing, readings dropping to 0. The crew worked quickly, switching systems to manual, guiding the ship not by sensors but by instinct and training. Every spark of interference felt like the storm testing them, daring them to falter. But they didn't. Inside that small shuttle, 7 humans pushed forward into a place where even machines feared to go. They weren't chasing medals or history. They were chasing the faint hope that somewhere, lost in the storm, someone was still waiting to be saved. And for humanity, that was reason enough to fly straight into the impossible. The Aegis-3 shuddered violently as it entered the heart of the radiation belt. Waves of light pulsed across the darkness, painting the cockpit in flashes of green and crimson. The ship's metal creaked, strained beyond its limits, while the warning lights turned the cabin into a storm of red alarms. "Shields down to 40%!" someone shouted. Then, before anyone could respond, a sharp jolt threw the crew against their harnesses. The ship had taken its first real hit. Panels sparked. A thin crack spidered across one of the front windows, glowing faintly as radiation leaked through the energy field. The pilot gritted her teeth, adjusting the manual controls with trembling hands. The autopilot had failed. They were flying blind. Inside, the air grew thick with heat and the smell of burning insulation. One of the engineers, sitting closest to the rear systems, coughed violently. His skin had turned pale, his breathing ragged. The radiation had reached him first. Another crew member unbuckled, despite the chaos, and rushed to his side, strapping him into a protective pod. The pilot called out, "We can turn back, still make it home!" But the voice from behind, calm, firm, replied, "No, we came here for them. We finished what we started." Those words cut through the noise like a blade. No one argued. The radiation scrambled the instruments, making the screens flash nonsense data. Altitude, direction, and temperature became unreadable. The crew could no longer rely on technology, only their instincts, training, and a stubborn will to live. The pilot slammed the controls to manual override, shutting off non-essential systems to save power. Lights dimmed, engines sputtered, and the hum of the ship turned into a harsh, uneven rhythm. It wasn't flight anymore. It was survival. In the middle of the chaos, an idea sparked. Something simple, desperate, but human. The engineer, still conscious, began tearing through the storage compartment, pulling out layers of metallic tape, spare wires, and old insulation panels. "We're patching it old school," he said. "Duct tape shielding, Earth style." The others didn't hesitate. They sealed the flickering conduits, wrapped insulation around overheating pipes, and reinforced the failing shield emitters with whatever scraps they had. It wasn't science. It was instinct, the kind humans were known for when everything else failed. Outside, the storm grew brighter, waves of charged particles slamming into the hull like invisible fists. Each hit shook the ship so hard it felt as if the metal might tear apart. The pilot could barely see through the static, but she kept one hand steady on the control stick, flying not by data but by feel, the subtle vibrations, the rhythm of resistance, the faint hum that told her when the ship was veering too close to the storm's core. Then, through the chaos, a small miracle. The readings stabilized, just enough to glimpse a faint signal. The coordinates of Eos-9 appeared for half a second before vanishing again. But it was enough. "We've got them," the pilot whispered, voice cracking. The crew, bruised, exhausted, and half-blinded by flickering lights, looked around at one another. Their shields were nearly gone, their systems failing, but their spirit hadn't broken. They didn't know if they'd make it out alive. But they knew one thing for certain. As long as someone out there still needed saving, humans would keep flying through the storm, no matter how hard it hit. For 36 long hours, the galaxy held its breath, but no signal came from Aegis-3. The once bright dot on the Galactic Command's tracking screen had vanished into static. Every attempt to reach them failed. The Council's spokespeople released cold official statements, calling it a probable loss due to environmental collapse. Across the networks, commentators called it the human folly, another reckless attempt by a species too emotional to know its limits. Even the Allied fleet stopped monitoring, convinced that no vessel, human or otherwise, could survive inside the storm that had already shredded so many ships before. Yet, far beyond the sensors and the doubts, deep inside that raging sea of radiation and dust, the crew of Aegis-3 was still alive. Barely, the ship floated in near total darkness. Every light had burned out, and only the soft red glow of the emergency beacon pulsed weakly, like a heartbeat fading with time. The air recyclers had shut down hours ago, leaving the atmosphere inside the cabin thin and stale. The crew had stopped talking to save oxygen. Frost crept along the windows, a thin shimmer of ice that reflected their dim faces. They were drifting, powerless, invisible, forgotten. Captain Mara sat strapped into her chair, her hands trembling from exhaustion, her throat dry as she watched the final bars of battery fade from the console. The silence was deafening. Not even the hum of the engines remained. She could hear the faint breathing of her crew, each inhale slower than the last. Somewhere behind her, one of them whispered, "Is this it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the small data recorder, a portable transmitter the size of her palm, one of the few devices that still worked. She activated it, her voice quiet but steady despite the cold. "If anyone finds this," she said, "tell them we didn't quit." Her words echoed softly in the cramped space, breaking the stillness like a promise. She paused, her eyes glancing at her crew, faces pale but still determined, eyes half open but burning with the faint spark of life. "We came here for them," she continued. "We did what no one else would. And if this is where it ends, then let it be known. Humanity was here." She ended the recording and placed the small device inside a sealed emergency capsule. With what little power remained, they released it into the storm, hoping the signal might one day reach someone, somewhere. Outside, radiation shimmered like lightning through fog, swallowing the capsule as it drifted away from the broken ship. Inside, the crew closed their eyes, conserving the last of their strength. There was no fear left, only silence, the kind that comes when everything has been given. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, most had already moved on. News headlines faded, attention shifted, and the humans were written off as another tragic story of courage turned foolish. But the truth was far from over. Because even as the last systems of Aegis 3 went dark, something deep inside the storm flickered, a faint pulse, steady and rhythmic. The ship was not dead yet, and neither was hope. After drifting through the storm for what felt like endless hours, the faint ping of the shuttle's repaired sensors finally registered something. A weak, irregular radar echoed deep inside the heart of the chaos. Mara's heart skipped a beat. "There," she whispered, pointing to the tiny dot on the dim screen. The crew leaned forward, straining to see, every eye filled with a mix of disbelief and hope. With careful, trembling hands, the pilot adjusted their course, maneuvering through debris, radiation spikes, and gravity waves that tried to push them off track. Every moment was a battle, every second a test of will. They were exhausted, their bodies trembling, yet their minds refused to give in. The storm roared around them, but the faint echo grew clearer, and Mara knew this was the outpost, Station Eos-9. Battered, broken, but still alive. When they finally docked, the station looked like a skeleton. Walls were scorched, support beams twisted, and panels hung loose, threatening to fall at any moment. The air inside was thin, contaminated, and dangerously low in oxygen. And yet, through the haze of smoke and shadow, 3 tiny forms stirred. The surviving scientists, barely conscious, opened their eyes at the sound of the shuttle's engines, their faces pale and lined with fear. They had thought rescue impossible. They had thought no one would come. And yet here were humans, strangers, but somehow familiar in their persistence, alive and unbroken by the impossible journey. Mara and her crew wasted no time. They broke out emergency rations, carefully feeding the dehydrated scientists spoonful by spoonful, encouraging them to drink the recycled water. The medics worked quickly, stabilizing their breathing, patching minor injuries, and reassuring them with quiet words. It wasn't just the food or water that mattered, though. It was the presence of other humans in the dark, the rhythm of living hearts that told them they were not alone. The psychological weight of isolation had been heavier than the radiation or the cold, and now that burden began to lift almost imperceptibly with each steady heartbeat that surrounded them. While some crew members worked to seal the station's air leaks, others scrambled to repair critical systems. Lights flickered back to life slowly, panels blinked on, and the faint hum of functioning machinery returned. Mara watched them move, exhausted but determined, and felt a surge of quiet pride. These scientists had survived the storm, not only because of their training, but because humans had refused to give up. Later, when asked what had saved them, one of the scientists whispered, voice weak but trembling with gratitude, "It wasn't the water or the rations. It was the sound of your hearts. The fact that you came for us. That someone cared enough to risk everything." Mara smiled, kneeling beside them, and said softly, "We came because leaving you wasn't an option. No one is left behind, and in that fragile, ruined station, surrounded by shadows and debris, something larger than survival unfolded. A simple, human truth. Courage is more than technology, more than numbers, more than strategy. It is the presence of others when all seems lost, the refusal to stop, the act of showing up even when the odds are impossible. Against all odds, the humans had found the outpost, and in doing so, reminded everyone what hope really looks like. As the Aegis III prepared to leave the ruined Station Eos-9, a new challenge awaited them, one even more dangerous than the initial approach. The path back through the radiation belt was chaotic, unpredictable, and deadly. Waves of charged particles crashed into the shuttle's hull, setting off alarms and shaking the ship violently. Every reading flickered or disappeared entirely, leaving the crew blind in many areas. The engines, already strained from the storm, sputtered repeatedly, threatening to shut down completely. Mara's hands gripped the manual control stick with white-knuckled determination. Every decision mattered. A single mistake could tear the shuttle apart. To lighten the load and increase their chances of survival, they began jettisoning non-essential cargo. Racks of research samples, carefully collected over months of scientific workmiss, were thrown into the storm, vanishing in streaks of light and sparks. Every piece discarded was a hard choice, a reminder that survival sometimes required letting go of what you had worked so hard to protect. Crew members helped each other secure the remaining essential systems, their movements precise despite exhaustion. The ship groaned under the stress, but the humans refused to let fear take over. The magnetic corridors of the storm were collapsing in unpredictable patterns. Invisible fields twisted and buckled, pushing and pulling the shuttle in ways that defied conventional physics. Sensors went haywire, so Mara relied entirely on instinct and experience. She kept her eyes locked on the faint glimmers of light from debris and distant energy pulses, using them as markers to guide the ship. For 70 hours straight, she didn't rest. Her crew rotated minimal shifts of sleep, but Mara stayed awake, flying, calculating, reacting to every surge and jolt. Her body screamed for rest, her mind burned with fatigue, but she did not slow down. Inside the cabin, tension was almost tangible. The crew communicated in short, efficient bursts, every word measured to conserve energy and maintain focus. Every time the engines threatened to fail, the engineers worked with ingenuity and grit, rerouting power, repairing conduits, and stabilizing systems on the fly. Mara's voice never wavered, giving orders calmly, even when panels exploded or sparks flew dangerously close. Their combined effort was like a synchronized dance, each human acting as an extension of the others, every movement saving lives. Outside, the storm raged on, as if testing them, trying to claim the shuttle that dared to fly through it. Radiation waves slashed past the hull, magnetic anomalies twisted their course, and debris collided with terrifying frequency. Yet against all logic, the shuttle pressed on. The humans inside refused to yield. Their determination was more powerful than any storm, their courage heavier than any structural failure. Every second felt like an eternity, every moment a battle between life and oblivion. But slowly, imperceptibly, the swirling chaos began to thin. The path toward open space became visible, marked by faint glimmers of distant stars. Mara exhaled sharply but didn't relax. The journey was far from over, but she knew that with every ounce of will and skill, they were closer to surviving than any previous mission would have predicted. In the heart of the impossible, Humanity's endurance shone brightest. After hours of struggling through the collapsing storm, the Aegis-3's power finally drained to critical levels. Lights dimmed completely, life support systems faltered, and the main communication array went silent. The crew was left in near-total darkness, only the soft, steady beeping of the emergency monitors keeping them aware of time passing. The shuttle floated in a vast emptiness, the void pressing against the thin metal hull. For a moment it seemed that the mission, their lives, and all hope would end in silence. Yet the humans refused to surrender. With careful precision and sheer determination, they reached for the old hand-cranked transmitter, a small, simple device brought along as a backup for emergencies. Its technology was outdated by decades, laughably basic compared to the advanced arrays other species relied upon, but it was all they had. Working together, the crew turned the crank continuously, generating a weak but persistent signal. They didn't know if anyone would ever hear it. The signal drifted through space like a faint pulse, barely a whisper against the storm of cosmic radiation. Mara monitored it tirelessly, adjusting the orientation of the transmitter to maximize its reach. Every rotation of the crank was a silent testament to human persistence, a refusal to give up when logic said it was over. The three rescued scientists watched in awe, unable to fully comprehend the resilience and determination of those who had come for them. Days passed. The shuttle drifted through the void, battered, scarred, and running solely on human grit. The beacon's pulse was faint, intermittent, almost imperceptible. Yet it endured. It was not a call of despair, but a call of defiance, an unspoken message that humans never quit no matter how impossible the odds. While the Galactic Council and other species had already written off the mission, the signal persisted, floating silently, waiting for eyes brave enough to follow it. Then, unexpectedly, the beacon caught the attention of a Tarith patrol ship. The Tarith species had long watched humans with a mixture of amusement and doubt, often noting their reckless tendencies. But something about the signal, its persistence, its unyielding pulse, intrigued them. It wasn't strong, it wasn't advanced, and it certainly wasn't efficient. Yet it had survived where countless others would have failed. Curious and cautious, the patrol crew decided to trace it, venturing into the storm-racked region that no one else dared to enter. What they found stunned the galaxy. Floating among the debris, the Aegis-3 was scorched, battered, and barely holding together, yet intact. Inside, all 7 humans were alive, exhausted but alert, alongside the 3 scientists who had been stranded. The patrol crew watched in disbelief as the humans had managed to survive against odds that would have destroyed any other vessel. The Aegis-3, once considered lost, became a symbol, not just of survival, but of the unyielding human spirit. Word spread quickly. Across species and star systems, whispers of amazement circulated. How had a small human crew defied the storm, survived against impossible odds, and saved others in the process? The beacon, humble and weak, had carried more than a signal. It had carried the proof of human determination. In that moment, the galaxy began to see what humans had always known, that persistence, courage, and the refusal to give up can accomplish the impossible. As word of the Aegis-3's survival spread, the galaxy could hardly believe what had happened. News networks from dozens of star systems broadcast footage and reports of the mission, showing the scorched shuttle, the exhausted but alive human crew, and the 3 rescued scientists. Across alien worlds, reactions ranged from astonishment to awe. For decades, humans had been dismissed as reckless, their willingness to take risks criticized as foolishness. But now, the story of the Eos-9 rescue changed everything. They were no longer reckless, they were relentless, unstoppable in the face of impossible odds. Across Tarith space, one officer remarked during an interview, "They don't stop, they break every rule of survival. And somehow, they live." The comment echoed across other networks and species, shaping the way the galaxy viewed humanity forever. Scholars and engineers began studying the mission data carefully. Every calculation, every maneuver, and every decision made by the crew was analyzed in detail. The sensors and instruments of Aegis-3, though partially damaged, had recorded valuable information about radiation fluctuations, debris patterns, and magnetic field collapses. The human crew had improvised solutions using little more than ingenuity, raw materials, and determination. Experts soon realized that the data could save future missions from catastrophic failure. Colonies in unstable star systems, mining operations in asteroid belts, and research outposts in volatile regions would now have blueprints to survive environments previously thought impossible. The humans had not only completed a rescue, they had created a guide to survival in the galaxy's most dangerous regions. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, ordinary citizens marveled at the story. Schools on distant planets included it in their curricula as an example of courage and perseverance. Young cadets trained in space academies cited the mission as proof that determination and teamwork could overcome even the deadliest odds. Communities that had once doubted humanity's abilities now admired them. For the first time, humans were not just tolerated, they were respected for qualities that other species had overlooked: courage, creativity, and an unyielding will to survive and help others. Back on Titan's moon base, Mara and her crew quietly recovered from their ordeal. Despite the fame and accolades they began to receive, they remained humble. They did not see themselves as heroes. To them, they had simply done what any human would have done: refused to leave those in danger behind. The rescued scientists spoke endlessly of the crew's calm, methodical actions under pressure and how those actions had saved their lives. It was not just technology or training that had made the difference, but the human spirit itself. In the weeks and months that followed, the mission's success became a turning point in interstellar relations. Humans were invited to lead future rescue operations and serve as consultants for exploration missions. Other species began to understand that survival was not only about logic and calculations, but about determination, compassion, and the courage to act when others hesitated. Humanity's reputation shifted from reckless to extraordinary, and the lessons from Eos-9 would be passed down for generations. The galaxy had witnessed a defining moment. Humans did not just survive the impossible, they transformed it into hope and knowledge for all. Years after the daring rescue at Station Eos-9, the galaxy had not forgotten the humans who risked everything to save lives when no one else dared. On the Council's capital world, in the heart of the gleaming city where leaders of dozens of species convened, a monument now stood. It was simple yet powerful. A polished stone pedestal, topped with a soft, ever-glowing light that never dimmed. On the small plaque attached to the base were 8 words, etched clearly for all to read: "No one wanted the mission, until humans came." Visitors from across the galaxy paused before it, reading the words with quiet reverence, understanding immediately that it was not just about one mission, one rescue, or one shuttle. It was about courage, determination, and the refusal to leave anyone behind, no matter the odds. Beneath the plaque, the eternal light burned steadily, a symbol of human spirit rather than a memorial to loss. It was a light for persistence, for hope, for every person who had ever stared down impossible odds and refused to turn away. Engineers, scholars, students, and even young cadets training for interstellar missions stopped to take photographs, copy the quote into journals, and reflect on what it truly meant to act despite fear. The monument became a beacon of inspiration not only for humans, but for other species as well. They had watched humans survive storms, radiation, and near-certain destruction, and now the lesson was immortalized in stone and light. Determination, ingenuity, and compassion could surpass every calculation of risk. In classrooms and training halls across the galaxy, instructors told the story of the Aegis-3 mission, highlighting how the human crew had refused to quit when others declared the mission hopeless. Videos, holograms, and simulations recreated the ship navigating collapsing magnetic corridors, engines failing, and radiation surging, yet still reaching the stranded scientists. Children, cadets, and new explorers absorbed the story with awe, learning that courage was not simply physical strength or advanced technology, but the will to act when action seemed impossible. Teachers reminded their students that humans had not sought glory. They had acted because it was right, and because life mattered more than calculations or caution. Even decades later, the legacy of the mission lived on in active protocol. Whenever a distress signal rang out from a remote or dangerous location, one phrase was quietly repeated among the council and rescue teams alike: "Send the humans." It had become shorthand across species, a recognition that humans embodied persistence, ingenuity, and selfless determination. It was not a legend of conquest, but a celebration of heart, effort, and unwavering commitment. Visitors to the monument sometimes left small tokens, candles, flowers, or notes as reminders of courage in the face of fear. Scholars used the story as a foundation for leadership and crisis management courses, while engineers referenced human improvisation in designs for resilient spacecraft. The simple act of risking everything to help others had rippled through time, shaping cultures, inspiring generations, and changing how civilizations across the galaxy understood bravery. And though many years passed, the humans themselves never claimed more than a quiet satisfaction. They went on to new missions, new rescues, continuing to demonstrate that heroism was not about recognition but about action. The eternal light at the monument burned on, casting a soft glow over the capital world, a constant reminder that when the impossible calls, humans do not hesitate. They rise, they act, and they carry hope where none existed before.